Realm presents Ctrl-Alt-Destroy. Episode 9.
As Benjamin Kim Jr. tapped his phone, banging out the last few sentences of the paper that was due in 10 minutes, he nearly ran into the mass of students gathered in the middle of the path leading to the philosophy department building. Excuse me. He only looked up long enough to maneuver around them, but a young woman stepped in front of him. "Hey," she said, shaking her poster board at him, dark ponytail whipping behind her. "Can't you care enough about the world outside your little bubble long enough to look up from your stupid device? Do you even have enough bars to do anything?" "Huh?" Benjamin tried moving again. "I have to get to class, sorry." She moved to block him again, her cheeks pink. "How much do you think your class will matter in 5 years? Have you been paying attention at all? Do you see the tension we're causing on the global stage? We need to start with bringing our troops home. Our presence is intimidation. If kids our age don't care, who will?" Looking past the girl for a way through the crowd, he finally noticed their signage and realized they were protesting the recent involvement of American military personnel in disaster relief overseas. Again, she tried positioning herself in his line of sight. "You can't be bothered, can you, like anyone else? You're all the same. Just go to class, screw the people. Who cares about the troops caught up in the military-industrial complex?" Benjamin's ears grew hot. "My father is one of D troops, and he's out there helping rebuild devastated communities while you yell at people you know nothing about. Now, unless you have an obviously non-utilitarian answer to the trolley problem, I'm going to finish my paper and go to class." "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know your dad was..." The other students' voices ate up the last of her words as Benjamin hurried the rest of the way to the philosophy building. His father was only a vague memory at this point, a military man he'd met when he was a kid. Still, not a day went by that he didn't wonder who his father might be, what his role in the military had become, how he thought about his decisions, what led him to his chosen path. No matter what the answers, Benjamin knew that whatever his father was doing, he was safer for it. He had to believe it. One. Tandy, class failed archer, level 9, HP 102 out of 102. Status normal, XP 30,206. Next level 45,000. Team USA stood at the gate of Skull Keep, that mighty fortress of stone and dread that had thwarted them before. The sheer size of it still made Tandy feel dizzy with insignificance.
Ugh.
Dante had the look of interacting with his HUD.
"That's one more team ahead of us. Just entered right before we got here. Global chat sends out a notice every time another team crosses into the keep because it's the in-game raid. You guys really should activate chat more often."
"We have you for that," Ben said. "Who's in there?"
Korea and Russia, of course. Nigeria, Indonesia, Canada, Singapore, Turkey, India. And that list should include the United States. But of course, we're standing here like noobs.
Tandy glanced over to Quest, the Skull King's crown, which had been sitting in her HUD since they originally tried raiding the keep. That recommended level, 9 through 12 underneath it, cut a hole into her gut. It was hard not to lose hope and believe they'd be slaughtered. They met the minimum recommended level now, but would it be enough? "We're still under-leveled," Tandy said. "Those monsters might crush us completely again, not to mention the boss." Dante grunted in frustration.
You really think if we hold off to level, one of those other teams won't win the game in the meantime?
He caught himself inside.
Sorry, just stressed. Listen, it's now or never. We lose because we waited. We might as well go for a hike in the afterlife anyway.
Tandy knew he was right about the risk they would have to take. It was either roll over and let someone else win, or at least go down swinging. I don't want to lose, Tandy said. And we have the ossify spell. That will help. Maybe it'll even give us enough of an edge over the other teams. She said this more to convince herself than anyone else. Sounds like the choice is pretty clear, Etta said. Everyone ready? Tandy exhaled slowly, trying to shake off her anxiety, then looked at Ben. Who dares wins, right? He seemed surprised for a moment, then clapped her on the back. Right. You got it. Stack formation behind Dante. Etta nodded once at Dante to confirm. He gave her a confident smile and led the way. As they stepped across the threshold, a series of alerts appeared on Tandy's HUD. PvP zone. Global chat disabled. Shit. PvP again, Ben said. Look sharp. Everyone readied their weapons. Dante crept forward. The others followed. His shoulders looked broader than usual, his posture more self-assured. Dante was no longer playing the role of tank. He was embodying what it meant to be a tank. A sword and shield made human. It flooded Tandy with a sense of loyalty. She stepped forward behind him. Etta and Ben immediately behind her. A dripping sound echoed somewhere to Tandy's right, its source eaten by shadow. She could hear Etta's breath nearby, measured but wavering. Tandy was afraid, but she wasn't alone. A crunch beneath her boot. She moved her foot and looked down. Fragments of crushed bone dusted the floor. Bones rattled around them, a few at first. Then the room was filled with clacking and scratching.
The undead.
Dante spoke over his shoulder in a low voice.
They're waking up.
Etta whispered a low-level spell to ignite the end of her staff with a pale blue glow.
No point in stealth now.
Beyond the illuminated circle of light around them came the suggestion of something rising in uneven jerks, a wave of writhing darkness and red eyes. Dante inched forward, shield raised. Tandy had never felt so grateful for that metal barrier between them and the unseen menace ahead.
Ben, Etta said. Use the ossify spell, quick.
Ben retrieved the spellbook page, unfurled it, and recited the words. Discordant, tritone music began playing, filled with non-linear noises, waterphone trills, and crescendoing minor chords. Sudden high notes bit at Tandy's nerves. When Ben finished the spell, the scroll disintegrated into dust and a 30-minute timer appeared on the HUD, while their mini-map and other information disappeared. Losing the mini-map unexpectedly hit Tandy with a wave of disorientation, but she didn't have long to dwell on the feeling. Heat tingled across Tandy's body, then sunk deeper, lighting her veins on fire. Lava-hot waves cascaded through her. Black liquid bubbled up through her flesh, parting muscle and sinew, turning her warm brown skin into gray ruin of rot. Horror crawled up inside her throat and compelled her to claw at herself, to get the death out of her, but she forced herself to swallow it down. She was powerless to stop the process. Raw bone peeked through her decaying forearm. Exposed tendons flexed when she curled her fingers. Hesitantly, lightly, she touched her cheek with ruined fingertips, which came away covered in more of her rotten flesh. Tandy didn't know if she wanted to cry or scream or both. The others were similarly overcome, with tufts of hair falling to the floor, faces drooping with decay, patches of broken teeth exposed where they shouldn't have been. The putrid scent of death wafted over all of them, suffusing Tandy's senses. She bent over and gagged.
Keep it together, girl.
Etta's whisper came as a rasp, her vocal cords shredded by the transformation.
We've only got half an hour, so let's make it count.
Dante pushed forward as planned, an undead tank forging toward a doorway at the far end of the room. The corpses surrounding Team USA had fully risen, but were now only milling about around them, occasionally leaving puddles of bile and blood-clotted flesh in their wake. The Skull King's servants paid no mind to the humans as they hoped. Their presence seemed to register only as fellow undead. Their feet dragged along the stone floors in an eerie chorus of whispers, and Tandy's soul shuddered when she registered she was part of it. Everyone followed Dante. None of them moved quickly. No matter how hard she pushed, Tandy couldn't manage more than a slow shuffle. A few times, one of the Skull King's creatures would bump up against her or her teammates, smearing them with gore or taking part of their rotting flesh with them. She felt faint with disgust. Never again would she think of video game zombies the same way. As they lumbered ahead, Tandy noticed a second door that was flush with the western wall. Easy to miss. She detoured a few feet to check it out, but found it locked. "What is it?" Etta called in her dead, weakened voice. Locked door. What if this was a shortcut to the Skull King? Korea was far ahead of them, and there were so many other teams. "No time," Ben struggled to say. "Spell. No key, no time." Tandy groaned in frustration, then cut herself off when she realized how utterly undead she sounded. By the time they made it to the first door, 30 minutes had ticked down faster than she thought they would. They had only 10 minutes remaining. Dante pressed his ear against the door.
I don't hear anything,
he rasped, teeth visibly clacking as he moved his jaw.
Let's go then.
Etta nodded at him. Tandy adjusted her grip on her bow. If they needed to fight, could she manage in her current state? How would this spell affect her ability to defend herself? How would she dodge even the most straightforward attacks? Only one way to find out, she thought as Dante pushed open the door. Battle music overtook the previous soundtrack. Where the first room had been dark, the second room was already illuminated, thanks to the 4 Russians battling 2 enormous undead minotaurs inside it. The largest of the pair bellowed loudly in Olenka's face. A low and powerful sound Tandy felt deep within her chest. It swung its battle axe in a sweeping arc and Olenka rolled to dodge, barely avoiding being cleaved in half. Ruslana spotted the Americans. "More undead! Leave nothing moving!" The Russian archer prepared to shoot at them, but a mighty backhand from the other Minotaur sent her body sailing into the nearby western wall with a sickening crack. Its nostrils flared as it huffed and snorted, but it paid no mind to Tandy or her teammates. "Go," Ben wheezed. "Get to the stairwell, far side." Immediately he began chanting his Ashfall spell. Confusion flashed across Olenka's face, then recognition. "It's the Americans." Tandy trundled forward and readied her bow and arrow. Just as she was passing several zombies without disturbing them, feeling grateful for her team's undead advantage, Ruslana spun past her to dodge a Minotaur's attack, and the scent of the human's living body overwhelmed Tandy's senses. Blood. Living flesh. Darkness grew large inside her, a sinkhole of hunger. She wanted to bite Ruslana. Relentless craving overwhelmed her senses. Each moment was a fresh struggle not to surrender to the temptation of teeth sinking into soft flesh. The scent of her aliveness, her humanness, was unlike anything Tandy had ever experienced, more intense than any normal hunger. A bite coiled within her jaw, waiting to spring on Ruslana, while her mind wrestled against the ossify spell's side effects. It was Olenka's strangled cry that pulled Tandy out of it. She, Ruslana, and the nearby Minotaur all spun to look. One dead Minotaur lay sprawled on the floor behind the clustered group of players, still gripping its battle axe. Dark, coagulated blood bubbled out of it for a few seconds before the monster exploded into dark particles. Now Etta was grappling with Olenka, trying to bite her, and just as Tandy had fully registered everything she was seeing, Dante crept up behind Olenka and shoved his sword deep into her back, impaling her, then withdrawing the blood-soaked weapon. Etta snapped back to herself and stepped away. Blood gurgled up out of Olenka's mouth. She turned around as she sank to the floor. Anger and pain contorted her features, a look she pinned firmly on Dante. It wasn't real. None of it was real, but it felt real. Tandy remembered her own injuries and knew Olenka's pain ricocheted through her brain the same as it would have in the world outside. Ben and the Russian archer were facing off in the far corner, but both stole glances at the others. When the archer realized what had happened, she let off a clumsy shot that flew far left of Ben's head, She started to head for Olenka, but Olenka only lasted another breath.
You killed her!
The archer shouted, lunging for Dante with raw rage. Ruslana grabbed the archer's arm and pulled her toward the exit that would lead them to the stairwell, saying something to her that Tandy couldn't hear. Ben wasted no time in firing off a lightning spell, but Ruslana dodged it and pulled the archer down with her. Their warrior teammate swung his large iron hammer at the remaining minotaur to give the other two the chance to exit, slamming the creature hard enough to cave its chest into a ruin of bone and blood. Ruslana and the archer slipped out into the stairwell leading to the second floor. The gore-splattered warrior turned to the Americans and threatened them with his hammer, lest they think they could take him while his teammates escaped. But the Russian looked stunned, his eyes occasionally glancing at Olenka's still body. Tandy realized she had knocked an arrow unconsciously, so she raised it, aiming between the warrior's eyes. The warrior locked his dark gaze with Tandy's, then ran to catch up with his team. Two. Dante, class, Bladed Guardian, level 10, HP 208 out of 208, status normal, XP 46,368, next level 55,000. The ossify spell wore off, restoring their bodies, minds, and HUDs, but a thick cloud of guilt suffocated Dante in its place. He wiped Olenka's blood on his breeches. Dark stains now joined the dirt and mud of his increasingly weathered gear. He looked at his hands, still faintly red. "You okay?" Tandy said. Concern mixed with anxiety on her face. He knew why. They didn't have time to deal with him agonizing over killing an enemy player.
Yeah.
PvP was PvP. Ben died and was fine. Olenka would be waking up in the afterlife any second now and battling her way back. Right? Judging by the thick bands of rotting muscle on those minotaurs, they could have made Olenka's death much more painful than Dante had. Killing her was a mercy if nothing else, and it wouldn't make sense for the game to kill her in the real world just because this was a boss dungeon. No one in the public would stand for that. Right? Her lifeless eyes stared past him. He thought about the mind control spell that had overtaken him during their fight in Minglegrass Wood. Of the horror of the undead from the past couple of rooms. Video games had always been just realistic enough to satisfy his desire to play the hero and gain notoriety. But now Olenka's corpse was part of these visceral experiences that his body and brain couldn't differentiate from real life. "Dante," Etta took his arm, firm but kind. "We have to go. You did what you had to do so we could keep on. She'll be fine." He nodded, still dazed. But Etta was right. He would have plenty of time to contemplate his actions when they were finished with the Skull King. By then, hopefully he would see Olenka showing up in global chat again, and he'd give her hell for falling to his sword, just as she'd got him with some sharp insult. "Let's go." Etta shooed the group toward the door. They exited into the stairwell and climbed the wide, winding staircase, careful to keep their eyes peeled for the Russians. Tandy laughed from behind Etta. "Too bad I didn't design anything in the original game to give us a leg up. Like a way to unlock that dang door back there or a magic button to..." The stones in the wall of the landing a few steps above them began sliding, reconfiguring themselves. A large circular stone surfaced from within the wall, embedding itself perfectly into the new arrangement of masonry. Dante felt his face contort in confusion. This wasn't the kind of game that was responsive to player speech outside the NPC dialogue trees.
What the hell?
As if an invisible hand guided a sharp implement, a message was slowly cut into the stone. "Push me." "I feel like we just switched genres," Tandy said. "Alice in Wonderland was never my style." "Well," Etta said, "seems to me like we should do what it says." "Whoa, wait. Ben nudged his way up from the rear of the group. passing the others until he stood on the landing. "We can't just start pushing every button that tells us to. We don't know what it does. Maybe it'll kill us on the spot." Tandy gently brushed a fingertip over the last bit of the message. There's a smiley face. All of Dante's gaming instincts told him,
Yes, push the damn thing. We're losing, he said. It's a gamble, but I say we take it.
Ben ran his hand through his hair and pressed his lips into a tight line. "I don't know."
We were decomposing a few minutes ago and trying to eat the Russians' face off, Dante said. Pretty sure we can handle a button.
He pushed it. A tremor rolled through the keep, nearly knocking them off their feet. Everyone braced themselves against the walls or stairs, crouching down for purchase. Tandy almost fell backward, but Dante grabbed her shirt and yanked, then helped her gain her footing. Stones scraped against stones somewhere deep within the structure. All fell quiet. On the leaderboard, the Russians dropped below Team USA.
Wait, what?
Dante examined his HUD. No Russians on the mini-map. Their rank had been bumped down. Where were they? All he could say was, "Wow." "This doesn't make any sense," Ben said. "Where did they go? Why did that button show up?" "Boy, somebody needs to teach you about gift horses," Etta said. Dante combed through his data on the keep, but there wasn't anything to illuminate what had happened to the Russians. If the rankings at this point were mainly influenced by progress in the keep, that meant the Russians had lost ground somehow. With that earthquake, Dante wondered if they'd fallen into some hidden trap to a lower level. They weren't on the second floor mini-map at all. It was the only thing he could think of that would make any sense. Either that, or they were killed, or expelled from the keep entirely. Either way, Team USA was in much better shape with one enemy group knocked back. "Let's not waste any more time," Etta said. And Dante couldn't have agreed more. He dismissed his spreadsheets and led the way. They crossed the threshold from the stairwell into the second floor proper and were greeted by a notification. 2 teams of 2. Choose your paths." The small room split off into 2 hallways, one leading upward, the other down. Dante prepared to split off with Tandy, the obvious way to divide the team. Ben's nuclear attacks would waste enemies quickly enough when supported by Etta's healing, and Dante would protect Tandy. "Tandy and I will go up," Etta said. "Ben and Dante, you take the other path. Hopefully we'll meet up on the other side." Huh. Okay then. Part of him wanted to argue like he would have a few weeks ago, but Etta was the boss. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was. But he'd do what he had to either way. "Hopefully we'll meet up." Ben's tone was flat. "Great. Do you have a better suggestion than following the game's directions? You want to just march into one of those tunnels, all 4 of us, like the game won't care if we break the rules?" Etta said. Ben raised his hands in surrender. "I'm just saying, hopefully it's an uncomfortable bet. There's a lot riding on all this out there." He waved around vaguely to indicate the outside world.
Don't worry, Captain America,
Dante said as he headed toward their hallway.
Your ass is safe with me.
He didn't have to see Ben to know he was rolling his eyes, and that made him smile. They headed down the hallway, silent and alert. Water dripped somewhere ahead. Candlelight flickered, creating uncanny creatures of their bobbing shadows. The smell of damp rock reminded Dante of his grandparents' basement. On the right, they approached a doorless entrance to a large, empty room.
Is that it?
Dante carefully peered in, flanked by Ben. Restraint, Ben reminded him.
Definitely.
It only took a couple of breaths for Dante to realize they were looking at a familiar space. The room they had broken into during their earlier failed attempt at completing the Skull King quest. Ben's breath hitched. He must have realized it too. But why was it here? Shouldn't it be closer to the actual throne room? An entire floor above them? Maybe the keep was in the habit of reconfiguring itself and the Russians had just happened to get the raw end of it. But this was definitely the room. Memories pinged clearly in his mind. He could see their party being overwhelmed by the enemy. The scratching chorus of voices screaming, "Violators!" The feeling of sharp legs tearing at his back as he ripped tomb crawlers from his body. This time, there were no rotting paladins with dead orange eyes, no creatures skittering in their peripheral vision, just an empty room, tinged with the faint stench of blood. "Come on," Ben said. "There's nothing in here. Let's keep going." Three. Edda. Class, Divine Seeker. Level, 9. HP, 97 out of 114. Mana, 22 out of 38. Status, normal. XP, 41,315. Next level, 45,000. Edda and Tandy made their way down their own hallway, faintly lit by candle sconces along the walls. Edda stole a few glances at Tandy to see how she seemed to be holding up. She could tell the ossify spell had disturbed her maybe as much as killing Olenka had shaken Dante, and she was a little concerned Tandy would falter at a crucial moment. Not to mention, she had a kind heart, and Edda didn't want to see her broken. Heaviness sank deep inside her. Tandy's focus broke when she saw Edda looking at her. "So why'd you divide us up the way you did anyway?" "Thought we could use a little girl time," she smiled playfully. Tandy laughed. "Right. Girls' night in the keep." "Really, though? I thought you'd want each of us to team up with Dante and Ben, since they're the ones who know all the strategy stuff." "I'm not so bad at the strategy stuff, you know." "Oh, no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." "Giving you a hard time," Edda laughed. "Ben's what did Dante call him? A glass gun?" "Glass cannon." "Right. I could have teamed up with him to keep him topped off. But my HP isn't that great, even though it's higher than his. If I got taken down, Ben wouldn't last long. Dante's a solid tank. They'll do well together. You have better defense, and your damage output gives us a great chance at getting through whatever's ahead. And I know you've got my back just as much as I've got yours." The sincerity in Tandy's grateful expression almost made Edda want to turn back. Instead, she gave Tandy's shoulder a squeeze and they continued on. At the end of the hallway, they climbed a short set of stairs that led into a room empty of anything except a round, faintly glowing platform near the closest side. Edda and Tandy exchanged glances. Tandy shrugged. She tapped a toe onto the platform, which made it glow a bright blue and spawned an undead flying horse at the other end of the room. Most of its body, nothing but a skeleton with a few shreds of skin and sinew hanging on. "Zombie Pegasus," Tandy said. "Nice." "It's not attacking," Edda said. "Look how far away it is. We're probably not in range." "Let's test the waters then. Close the gap and fire one off." Both women drew their weapons and crept forward until they were within a reasonable distance of the mob. Tandy let loose an arrow, which flew directly at the horse's chest. It pinged off of it harmlessly and fell to the floor. At the same time, an invulnerable status appeared above the mob. In retaliation, the Pegasus reared up and shot a dark cloud of smoke from its mouth that smelled like rotten eggs, debuffing them both with weakness. Great. Edda attempted cleansing the debuff, but of course it did nothing. "We can't attack it, and I can't remove our status effects." Tandy jogged back to the front end of the room and stepped up onto the platform, which grew bright again. At the same time, a blue light flashed around the Pegasus, and a faint but visible barrier appeared around the platform, encasing Tandy in a translucent tube. "Shit." Edda headed back over there and tried casting a weak healing canticle on Tandy to see if she could do so through the force field. Nothing happened. Tandy tapped on the barrier. "Can you hear me while I'm in here?" "Just fine. But you saw, I can't heal you through the force field." Tandy stepped off the platform, dissolving the barrier. The Pegasus flashed blue again, briefly, and an invulnerable status appeared above it. "I think I get it," Tandy said. "One of us has to stand on the platform to render the mob vulnerable to attack, but we can't do anything when we're on the platform. One of us can attack. That means either you can heal yourself while you fight that thing, or I can fight it and do more damage, but I won't have any heals." Etta eyeballed the horse that hovered on the other end of the room as it lazily flapped its bone wings, ready to attack once one of them was within range. "Doesn't look like it can move, at least." The safer course would be for Etta to slowly chip away at the creature's health with her paltry cleric attacks, knowing she'd be able to keep herself safe. But time wasn't on their side as it was. And who knew what was happening on Ben and Dante's side of things? She didn't want to keep her team divided any longer than necessary. Plus, how close were the Koreans to the Skull King? Not to mention any other number of teams. And losing the game was not an option. "You do it," Etta said, then tossed Tandy one of the healing potions. She caught it. "If we want to win this thing, we can't just play it safe. I know you've got this." Tandy tightened her grip on the potion and stared at it. "What if I don't got this?" Etta took Tandy by both shoulders and looked her right in the eye, keeping her expression warm. "Tandy, look around you. Now, I know this whole place isn't just the way you made it, but it wouldn't exist without you. And Team USA sure as hell wouldn't be as far along as we are. I believe that." She really did. No matter what happened, Tandy had proven herself to Etta, and to the others, for that matter. She could see it in their eyes. Greg was great, but he was no Tandy. "It's not a big deal to have you take down this pony, because I've seen you in action, and I trust you." She gave Tandy's shoulders a gentle squeeze. "You've got this. And even if I can't heal you, I'm here with you. We're a team." Tears shone in Tandy's eyes, but bless her heart, she choked them back and did everything she could to muster up a strong demeanor for Etta. It tugged at her heart. Tandy grinned and drew her bow. "I feel like you buffed me with that little speech," she smiled. "Good. Now kill this thing and let's get back to our guys." Etta stepped onto the platform, activating the barrier and rendering the enemy vulnerable to attack. Tandy crept forward until she was within firing range, then attacked. Compared to some of their other encounters, this mini-boss was a straightforward enough exchange of blows, putting aside the platform mechanic. Periodically, more foul smoke bellowed out of the Pegasus to debuff Tandy, causing her to lose HP with every tick even when she evaded its standard attacks. Etta called out what she saw coming, just in case Tandy needed the extra pair of eyes. She'd rather overhelp than the alternative, and she suspected Tandy would feel reassured knowing Etta had her back even from inside the barrier. She was the kind of woman who thrived when she felt supported. When Tandy's HP was at about half due to the debuffs, Etta called out to her, "Use the potion!" Tandy flinched. She glanced back at Etta to respond, "But what if I need it later? You need it now. You don't know if this thing has some big attack you can't avoid coming up. It could one-shot you. Look at your health." Tandy dodged an attack, then pulled out the potion. She looked at the bottle of blue liquid, faintly luminescent with magic. "Drink it," Etta said. This woman was more cautious than her Aunt Linda, and Linda had a basement full of canned food just in case. "It ain't gonna heal you by you staring at it. Trust me." Tandy tilted her head slightly in resignation. "Alrighty." She uncorked the potion and drank, restoring herself to full health. Then knocked her next arrow and continued to fight. She now had 4 stacks of that debuff on her. But the Pegasus' health was steadily decreasing, and Tandy was light on her feet thanks to the potion. At this rate, she should have plenty of time and HP to beat the Pegasus before they'd need to worry again. It seemed like it would be a steady climb to victory until the creature's health was at about 25% when it unleashed a new attack. There was no warning, no ground indicator, no way to avoid being hit. A dark bolt of energy stunned Tandy in place, and a black circular puddle of deadly-looking pitch spilled beneath her feet. I can't move, she shouted, body frozen in the defensive position she'd taken when the attack hit. Panic washed over her face. I'm stuck for 30 seconds. I'm sinking, Etta. Breathe, Etta said. Tandy couldn't turn around to look at her. She was forced to stare at the Pegasus as it reared up for its next attack. Just be ready to move out of that puddle as soon as you can. I'm sinking, Etta. Her voice quavered and several curses came rapid fire. The tar-licking substance was up to the middle of Tandy's calves. You'll be fine. Etta kept her voice even, calm, easy. Inside, an undertow of guilt pulled her down with Tandy. Maybe she should have paired Tandy with Dante, who would have made her stand on the platform instead of in that puddle. If Tandy panicked badly enough to fall to this beast, that was on Etta. 10 seconds left. Isn't that right? Etta said. 11. Okay, 10. It was up to her thighs. Etta kept her voice at that same, even, soft tone. Good. Almost done. Stay calm when you move. Just put your hands on the floor outside the puddle and hoist yourself up. No problem. Just before Etta finished speaking, Tandy's limbs fell from their frozen position and she struggled, glancing this way and that. Etta repeated herself, reminding Tandy to stay calm. The pitch had risen to Tandy's waist, but she put her palms on the floor, breathing, then groaned with effort as she pulled herself as hard as she could. Muscles in her neck and arms visibly strained as she pushed and heaved her lower body up out of the muck. She almost slipped, but finally, her legs were released with a nauseating, sucking sound, and Tandy rolled over onto the floor. The puddle disappeared. The Pegasus unleashed another attack. No time, Etta shouted, and pounded uselessly on the barrier. Get up! Tandy rolled out of the way. It took her a few dodges to shake off her fear, but Tandy pushed through. Over the next few minutes, she whittled the creature's HP down and down, sometimes managing 2 attacks before the horse fought back. Determination seemed to fill Tandy from head to toe from where Etta stood. With the final shot, she destroyed the undead beast. Battle music slid into a victory trill. Tandy's debuffs disappeared along with the barrier around the platform. When the mob screamed and dissolved into particles, a hidden door slid open at the base of the wall behind it. Tandy leaned on the nearest wall to catch her breath and recenter herself. You did great, Etta said, then gently laid hands on Tandy's wounds. It gave Etta a great sense of satisfaction to see visible relief wash over Tandy as she completed the spell, like she was making up for putting Tandy through that. Thank you, Tandy said breathlessly. That was rougher than I'd expected. And look at you, in one piece after all. Etta gestured at the newly opened door with a tilt of her head. I hate to cut your recuperation time short, but God only knows how Ben and Dante are doing on their side. Tandy slapped her thighs once as if to rally herself. Right, let's go. Upon examination, Etta could see the door was too small to stand in, but looked tall enough to sit in with a little extra clearance. She crouched and peered inside. It contained a smooth stone slide angled downward into unblemished darkness. This is our ride, she said. Tandy looked in as well. Hello! Not much of an echo. Etta shrugged and sat in the doorway feet first. See you on the other side. She launched herself off and leaned back, prepared for a wild ride down the chute, but it was mercifully short. It dumped her out into a cavernous, well-lit room where it took her a moment to register what she was seeing. The immense space made her feel insignificant, and a low, ferocious chorus of barks and snarls echoed all around them. Tandy slid out of the wall behind Etta and nudged her aside, but Etta couldn't tear her eyes away from Ben and Dante, who were still working on their challenge. A gargantuan, 3-headed dog chased a sprinting, sweating Ben around the room, the creature moving in long, loping strides. Long fur covered its entire body, much like a golden retriever, but it was ink black, and the dog had wolfish, pointed ears. 3 sets of blood-red eyes remained locked on Ben's tiny running body, Occasionally the dogs, swiped a massive paw at Ben or snapped one of its sets of powerful jaws, barely missing his robe. Apparently the dog hadn't missed at some point earlier. The back of Ben's robe had split about halfway up his legs. Cerberus. Tandy's voice came almost as a whisper, faint with awe. He looks amazing. Look at that fur. I'll never get over these textures. Ben repeatedly shot bolts of lightning or fireballs at Cerberus, but none of them did much damage. Nor did the sword swipes Dante took at the creature's ankles from behind and to the side. His attacks may as well have been mosquitoes. Each one did half a point of damage to its massive pool of HP. At this rate, they'd be kiting it for days, or until Ben collapsed from exhaustion.
"A little help?"
Ben called.
"We need more damage. How is anyone supposed to beat this thing?"
Tandy set down her bow and walked into the path of the three-headed monstrosity that could destroy her effortlessly.
"Tandy!"
Etta heard the frantic edge to her own voice. She hadn't coached Tandy out of certain death just to watch her eaten alive.
"What are you doing? Get out of the way!"
Ben sped up his sprint and grabbed Tandy, ready to pull her out of harm's way, but she yanked out of his grasp just as Dante had seen what was happening and started in her direction as well. All three players converged on her and tried to shove her away.
"Stop," Tandy said. "Trust me."
Cerberus barreled toward her, the top of his front toes as tall as her knees. He could easily swallow her. Etta tried to prevent herself from picturing Tandy's body crushed between his teeth, but the image came anyway. When the dog was close enough for Etta to count each hair on his foot, he lowered his three heads toward the floor. Cerberus growled so loudly, Etta's hands flew to her ears to protect them. Her eardrums throbbed and her stomach heaved with the depth and intensity of the sound. Ben and Dante were doubled over too. That crazy woman had better know what she was doing, or their mission was about to end in a massacre. The dog heads almost seemed to smile with malevolent anticipation. Curled lips revealed pale white teeth glistening with saliva. Red eyes savored the sight of their next meal. Please, God, let her know what she's doing. Tandy's expression never wavered from grim determination, until she slapped her knees once and said in a delighted tone, "Who's a good boy?" Oh, Jesus, they were all gonna die. "Is it you? Are you a good boy?" She bounced and slapped her knees again. "Cerberus is a good boy, isn't he? Good boy." The growling instantly stopped and several strong gales nearly blew over the team as Cerberus sniffed and huffed at Tandy, ears perked forward. Each head vied for space to examine her. Sour dog breath filled Etta's senses. It was all she could do not to retch.
"Tandy,"
Ben said, but Tandy held out a hand to hush him. The dog lowered his elbows to the ground and kept his butt in the air. Long black tail drifting from side to side slowly, uncertainly. "Cerberus is a good boy," Tandy sang. "Yes, he is. What a good boy." The accompanying background music abruptly shifted to a soft, plinking melody, reminding Etta of something out of a child's music box. Like a puppy, Cerberus lowered his butt to the ground and then rolled over onto his back, paws loose and floppy, belly exposed.
What?
Dante's mouth had dropped open.
What the hell?
"Give me a second." Tandy wasted no time in using his long hair to climb up onto his trunk and give him belly rubs, tiny though they were. Cerberus's tongues lolled out of his mouths, and one back leg began kicking involuntarily, which could have killed Dante if he hadn't ducked in time. The movement made Tandy nearly fall off, but much to Etta's amazement, she rebalanced herself just fine and kept petting the giant baby of a gatekeeper. Of course, Tandy would put something like this in the game. Etta couldn't help smiling. Amid all the carnage and cruelty was this token of Tandy's soft heart. As Tandy climbed down off the placated Cerberus, a notice popped up. Team bonus achievement. They're all good dogs. The door to the staircase opened with a musical flourish, beckoning them to the 3rd floor. Four. Ben. Class, Elemental Mage. Level, 9. HP, 90 out of 90. Mana, 28 out of 54. Status, normal. XP, 32,578. Next level, 45,000. In the next room, they were met with a floor of shifting color and light in a gradient pattern, and 2 large, undead, insect-like creatures hovered on the far end of the room. They looked a little like bees. Thick bodies twisted in midair, legs twitching, wings a blur at their backs. Wonderful, Ben said. Undead bugs. Dante rolled his eyes.
Insects. See the segmented bodies? And no stylet, which...
He paused and looked thoughtfully at the insects, eyes narrowed, then burst out laughing.
Oh man! Zombies!
Huh?
Zombies! Bees that... Never mind.
Tandy shrugged. Wasn't me, but I do love a good pun.
Anyway, lucky for us they're not moving yet. Pretty sure we have to step into the arena to officially activate the fight.
The 2 zombies looked at the players with compound iridescent eyes, their rapidly beating wings emitting a constant loud buzz. These colors have to mean something. Eda gestured at the current manifestation of illuminated yellow circles on the floor, which then shifted. The group was quiet for a moment as they watched. There was definitely a pattern to it. The circles showed up in quick succession, then disappeared almost as quickly. Are these those area of effect markers you were talking about, Dante? Ben asked. Are we supposed to stand in the empty zones?
I think so.
Dante said at the same time Tandy said, yeah. They all turned to her.
Did you put the AoEs in, Dante said? Like the dog?
No, she said. But it's a common enough way to indicate mechanics, right?
Right, Dante said. Let me go first. If we're wrong and the empty spots deal damage, I'm the one who stands the best chance of taking the hit.
Ben nodded and concealed a quiet swell of pride. The kid was really coming into his own. For the first time, he had the desire to introduce him to his son someday. Dante pointed as the AoE indicators appeared and disappeared in their repeating pattern.
The yellow circles appear one after another, then disappear in the same order. I can stand where the last one appears, wait for the first one to disappear, and step into that spot once it does. Does that make sense?
So you'll essentially hop back and forth between the last and the first spots to have their AoE indicators show up, Tandy said. But it switches patterns. We'll just have to stay sharp, Ben said. Tandy let out a measured breath. Okay, no pressure. We'll be okay, Ben said. I can keep an eye on the circles and call out our movements. Keep us coordinated. Good idea, Eda nodded. Let's do it. Dante. He unsheathed his sword and looked at the 2 undead insects that awaited them. Zombies. Ugh. Dante pulled out one of his 2 vitality potions that would buff his HP and resistance for the next 15 minutes, chugged it down, and bounced on his toes. His eyes tracked the pattern on the floor. As soon as the first indicator appeared, revealing which of the 2 patterns would be next, he stepped into the location where the last indicator should fall.
Guys, there's...
Fight music began playing, a synthetic-sounding rapid-fire piece with a deep bass and a buzzing sound underlying it all, reminiscent of the insects. It grated on Ben's nerves. Evidently, Dante couldn't divide his concentration between everything happening in the room and whatever he was trying to say. Ben's entire body tensed as he waited for the verdict on whether they were right about those indicators. Explosions blew in a circular pattern around the arena, following the order of the AoE markers, just as they had predicted. In fact, the explosions so far seemed to align with the beat of the background music. As soon as the first one detonated, Dante swiftly moved to the created safe zone, dodging an attempted swipe for the nearest zombie along the way. They all cheered, and Ben even caught himself punching the air in triumph. Dante could really move. Dante dodged again.
There's a status.
The other 3 players drew their weapons and joined Dante in the battle zone. As soon as Ben stepped over the threshold, a status effect lit up on his HUD and became visible over the other players' heads as well. Allergic immunity, 100%. Allergic immunity, 98%. This must have been what Dante had been trying to tell them. "What does it do?" Tandy shouted. "Not my design." "Allergic immunity." Etta cast a limited shield on Dante as he tanked the insects.
Pretty safe to say we don't want them counting all the way to 0. Focus on downing one mob at a time,
Dante shouted. Together, all 4 engaged in the dodging dance, keeping an eye on both enemies as well as the AoE indicators as they appeared and exploded. Gobs of decaying zombie flesh occasionally dripped from the mobs, slicking the floor and their gear.
2 o'clock,
Ben shouted, guiding them to the current target spot.
get ready. Next one's at 6.
These limited safe zones forced them to remain up close and personal with the mobs, far more than Ben would have liked. With each swipe of a stinger or leg, with each dive bomb from above, he waited for one of them to be clipped by an attack, or to linger just a moment too long in one of the AoEs. His billowing, damaged robe certainly didn't help him move as fluidly as he would have liked. Still, bit by bit, they took down the HP of one of the insects. Occasionally it healed itself, but not faster than they could damage it, just enough to prolong the fight. And then Dante was hit. A stinger grazed his cheek when he spun to slice at the wing of the second undead insect. Flying text above Dante revealed a necrotic, damage over time debuff that would drain 15 HP every 10 seconds.
I've got you.
Etta cast a cleanse canticle on Dante, but nothing happened.
12 o'clock,
Ben yelled.
go.
Shit,
Dante muttered as he moved.
just have to ride it out. HP is gonna tick down for the next 5 minutes. Keep me topped off as much as you can, Etta.
Move to 4 o'clock as soon as it detonates.
Ben fired off a lightning spell that critted and chained, hitting both mobs. Damn, that would never stop being satisfying, though he'd never admit that to Dante. Another hop into the next safe zone.
Thank God for those vitality potions,
Dante said, his flying text indicating his leaking hit points.
You're telling me,
Etta said, then began chanting quickly, readying her high-level cures. Allergic immunity, 80%. Tandy loosed an arrow at their target zombie, just as it was casting a self-cure. The arrow met its mark and killed the mob before it could finish its cast.
Yeah!
Tandy whooped and spun around as she hopped into the current safe zone, barely avoiding being clipped by one of those AoE detonations. She was going to give Ben a heart attack before anything in this dungeon killed him. The mob's body fell and exploded into particles, the music sliding into a transition phase. As it did so, a golden, viscous substance started dripping down the walls and seeping up through the floor.
what the fuck is that?
Dante said, blocking a hit from his right. It looks like honey, Tandy said. The floor seemed to sweat the stuff. They all had a harder time maneuvering, or even seeing the AoE markers for that matter. Of course, the markers had to be yellow of all colors. So easily lost beneath the honey substance now coating the room. A few times, Ben's shoes stuck to the floor and nearly made him fail his attempts at dodging. The beat of the music helped keep them focused, but it grew ever more frenetic, incorporating rainforest sounds and tinkling effects. Because why not? Suddenly, Dante's hit points dipped down to 8 just as he was hit by another tank buster attack from the remaining zombie. Dante! Tandy shouted. Oh my god!
It's okay. It's the Vit potion. It wore off. Etta, I got you.
Not missing a step, Etta unleashed her cued cure spell, filling him up to 90% HP. His debuff immediately started chipping away at his health again. Allergic immunity, 40%. On and on they moved attacked, dodged. Ben focused intently on the color of the floor, continuing to call out the next safe zone for his teammates so they wouldn't grow confused from the honey-covered mess. The music beat on, matching the rhythm of the patterns, cutting a groove into their movements. Even the insects' attacks lined up with the sounds. Allergic immunity, 25%. Ben's throat tightened. Oh no. His eyes watered. Something hot and uncomfortable seemed to be lodged inside his nasal passage. Even his gut faintly churned and ached. I can't. Tandy put her hand to her throat. Her eyes were red, her face inflamed. She almost tripped and failed to dodge an AoE detonation.
I can barely breathe. Careful,
Ben rasped.
focus.
We've almost got him, Etta said, then wiped her running nose with the back of her sleeve. The zombie was down to 30% health. Stay on it. We kill it, we can breathe easy again. Pressure built up in Ben's head. Pain throbbed in his gut with greater insistence as their allergic immunity ticked down. His pulse raced hard enough that for a terrifying moment he thought he might actually have a heart attack. A hot, relentless itch bore into his throat and eyes and nose, threatening to blur his vision, but he pushed on. Allergic immunity, 10%. Dante forced a strange cry from his tightening throat as he drove his sword deep into the zombie's thorax, relieving it of its last few hit points. The mob exploded around his weapon, disintegrating into pixels. Victory music echoed through the room. Instantly, the honey, AoEs, and debuffs disappeared. All 4 players let themselves collapse onto the floor. They said nothing, just breathed clean air freely, calmed their pulses. Let their ears relax after the beating that was the zombie battle music. Ben rested his arms on his knees, pressing his sleeves against his face to soak up any remaining tears and snot, but was surprised to find himself dry. Other than the psychological stress and fatigue, it was as if they'd never been afflicted in the first place. Jesus, Etta said. Dante laughed heartily, lying on his back, eyes closed.
Oh man, I want a nap.
Ben clapped him on the shoulder, gently shook it a few times.
You did great.
He rolled his head to the side to look at Ben, grinning proudly. Then he sat up and looked around.
So, there's no door except for the one we came in by. What's up with that?
Huh, Tandy said. Good question. We won, didn't we? A new song started. A strangely familiar song. Strings, deep bass drums, though less overwhelming than those of their recent encounter, plus a sound like rain? Where had he heard it before? You okay, Ben? Etta's voice came from far away. Ben's memory flared to life, vivid and visceral. He remembered where he'd heard this before. His body remembered. Damn it. He stood up and stretched briefly. Ben? Tandy raised her eyebrows. He stretched a little to the left, to the right, tried to remember the exact details. Was it arms forward first, or out to the sides? Forward, yes, he was pretty sure. Ben sighed.
Just give me a second.
The song looped back around to the beginning. There was no Meilin, no Tiago, but he could at least do his part of the movements. Embarrassment crept up behind his ears and heated his face. But when the first beat hit the song, he outstretched his arms and made a gesture with his hands, beginning the routine that had liberated him from the land of the dead. Tandy laughed. What?
Ugh.
Ben didn't let embarrassment stop him. He'd do what he had to do. Even the strange noises that had been requisite parts of the ritual movements. He fulfilled every step, bending his limbs, tilting his body, sweeping himself in long arcs that matched the swells and dips in the music. Dante was clearly beyond delighted at this unexpected performance. After a few sets of movements, Dante started bouncing his shoulders with the music and laughing to himself, then nodding with the music, then encouraging Ben with, "Yeah, yeah!" and "Ben, Ben, Ben, woo, woo!" Tandy and Etta joined in by clapping in time with the music. Ben was just grateful there was no way to record what was happening in Alternus for posterity. Right? Oh, jeez. That was a thought that would haunt him. He finished the routine with the final flourish. Head thrown back, eyes closed, hands reaching upward. The music stopped, and his teammates cheered.
I don't know what the hell that was, but it worked, Dante said. You got the moves.
Ben relaxed his posture. A doorway had materialized in the far wall. 5. Tandy. Class, Veiled Archer. Level, 9. HP, 75 out of 102. Status, normal. XP, 30,677. Next level, 45,000. They climbed the stairs to the final floor and were met with a notification. The antechamber. As soon as they crossed into the room, mobs began heading toward them, dozens upon dozens of undead, far more than they had encountered when they'd first arrived. Toward the back of the antechamber loomed one undead giant, easily 8 feet tall. For the moment, it remained shuffling far away from them, paying no attention to the newcomers. But it was only a matter of time before they'd have to face it. Sadly, Tandy probably couldn't just rub its belly. Dante forged on, rejuvenated after watching Ben's riveting performance, while the other 3 players angled themselves at one another's backs behind him, giving them a full collective view of the surrounding mobs. Tandy released an arrow at an approaching zombie and one-shot it. "Yeah!" she whooped, but then cut herself off when a purple mist rose up from the corpse and flew quickly overhead, then suffused the giant creature at the back of the room. Flying text indicated it had increased the mob's strength and endurance stats. The buff knocked it out of its stupor. It saw Team USA and shoved its way through the crowd of undead in their direction.
Shit, Dante said. That's not good.
"Every mob we kill is going to buff the big guy over there," Tandy said.
Shit.
Ben electrocuted another approaching mob and another, just enough to stun them and hold them off for a little extra time. Rotten flesh fell in gobs as they stumbled backward.
There's too many of them. We have to kill some.
"Pretty sure that's the point," Etta said. "We've got to balance how much our kills would enhance the big fella without getting overwhelmed." Dante wiped his brow, then grinned at the approaching enemy, which had almost arrived, along with a swarm of his smaller friends.
All right then.
He spun his sword and readied himself.
Let's do this. I'll hold off as many as I can without killing them.
You tell us when you want us to strike, Ben said. You can tell better than we can how much you can take.
Etta nodded. "And if I think you're in trouble, Dante, I'm doing what I need to do to keep you alive. Big zombie or no zombie. Got it?"
Loud and clear.
Together, they attacked the big zombie while holding off as many small ones as they could. But Dante's health repeatedly dipped dangerously low. There were just too many mobs to handle without killing them. One by one, they slaughtered what they had to, pausing between each kill to see whether Dante could balance his precarious dance. Then the large creature lifted its arms and glowed black.
Get ready with those heals, Etta,
Dante said. Tandy thought his shield looked frighteningly small compared to the giant. The creature slammed its large fists down onto the shield, almost knocking Dante over. Ben fired another couple of stuns to hold off the surrounding trash mobs while Tandy took aim at the big one's head. Just then, she saw its stats decrease back to what they were when they arrived. "Guys!" she shouted. "Look! It does that big attack, and I think that resets the buffs."
Perfect, Ben grinned. Then we've got this. I counted. That was 6 mobs worth of buffs. You think that was too much, Dante?
He shot a fireball at an undead that was inching a little too close to Etta, sending a purple cloud of buffs sailing into their primary target.
That's 1.
6 is good!
Dante adjusted his stance and continued holding off the enemy, parrying several blows in a row. He exhaled heavily.
Hedda, you good with 6?
She released the regen canticle to give Dante an extra edge.
You bet.
An arrow landed in 2 different small zombies, one-shotting them both, followed by a spray of gore from another creature destroyed. None of them had attacked the mobs. 3 waves of buffs flew into the mini-boss in quick succession, triggering a steady stream of flying text as it grew stronger. Team USA turned around to come face to face with Ruslana, her archer, and the warrior.
Shit,
Dante said, then wasted no time in shoving forward to put himself between his team and the Russians.
Let me try to worry about these guys.
Not on your own.
Etta readied her staff.
We're in this together.
Ben set off a small flame that singed the large undead.
If I can kite a giant 3-headed dog, I can kite this guy.
Ben, no, Tandy said. There's too much happening here. It'll make you vulnerable.
Let it. I can handle myself. That thing does melee damage. If he can't reach me, he can't hit me. Won't matter how much damage he does. And if I have to fall, it's not like I haven't been through that before. It's not a big deal. Let me do this. Just try to keep those little ones off me if you can.
Tandy inhaled in protest, but just gritted her teeth together and sighed.
Don't die.
A sharp whistle from between Ben's fingers made the zombie even angrier.
Hey, big man on campus, right here.
He rapped on his own head with his knuckles.
Yeah, oh, delicious brains, come and get 'em.
While the thing lurched at Ben and he kited it toward the back of the room, Dante and Etta were already engaged with Ruslana and her warrior. Tandy nearly cheered when Dante clubbed down onto Ruslana's head with the hilt of his sword when she tried to dodge. But where was the... An arrow struck the floor next to Tandy. She whipped her head around and saw the archer disappear behind a stone pillar. Tandy cursed and dove into the shadow of the nearest pillar on her side of the room. She didn't want to get too close to where Ben was kiting the mini-boss and chipping away at its HP, but neither did she want to lead the archer toward Dante and Etta. Could she just keep the archer engaged long enough for Ben to defeat the creature? How long would that take? Or would she have to kill her so that she could help take it down? She glanced over to where Ben was and fired off 2 arrows to take down a couple of small undead that were creeping toward him. There weren't too many of them left now, at least. Another arrow, this one into the pillar near her head. Shit! She had to do something. Adrenaline hummed through her body. Or well, the simulation simulated adrenaline. Focus, Tandy. She knocked an arrow. Breathed. Dante had taken down Olenka. He knew it was his team or Russia's. A roar of pain came from the direction of Dante and Etta, but she couldn't make out whose voice it had been. They needed her. This wasn't the time to be soft, to worry about how much it would hurt if her arrow found its mark. Even if this wasn't technically real, suffering was suffering. But she had to. She puffed out several breaths, preparing for what was to come, and quickly spun out from behind the pillar. She caught sight of the archer's green tunic and fired, then dove onto the floor and rushed headlong into the next hiding spot. No time to even see whether her aim was true. Panting, she hid, waited, listened. No arrows came for her. The shuffling and moaning sounded a little too close for comfort, though. She gave herself a second, then peeked out from behind the pillar. The tunic was in a pile across the room, right next to a shuffling zombie that was entirely too interested in it. No movement from the archer. She aimed and took out the zombie with a clean shot to the head, then chanced moving across the width of the space to check on her opponent. Ugh. She shoved aside the dead undead with her boot. It left a smear of rot on the floor. Blood darkened the rough fabric of the archer's garment thanks to an arrow planted firmly in her abdomen. Nausea flooded Tandy's stomach. She heaved a few times, but managed to keep the sick down. You can't be soft, she reminded herself. They need you. Tandy took advantage of the fact that the warrior and Ruslana were occupied by her teammates and used her stealth to sneak across the room, killing a couple of undead on the way. Hopefully Ben was doing okay with the big guy, because she'd lost count of how many strength buffs it must have by now. Another pillar served as a brief shield while she oriented her position relative to theirs. Dante was barely holding off both Russians, and the warrior had his eyes on Etta. Take down the healer, take down the party. Not on Tandy's watch. Cloaked in shadow, she took aim, remained focused, thought of nothing but the arrow and its target. Kept the warrior's head firmly in her sights, gave it a moment to be certain. She would only get one shot, and it wasn't an easy one. She exhaled and let fly. The warrior stopped mid-swing and dropped his hammer with a loud clang. He reached up behind his head to feel the arrow that had pierced his skull, but fell dead before he could touch it. Ruslana whipped around to face Tandy. She roared furiously and raised her sword, face red with exertion and rage as she charged. Tandy hurried to knock another arrow. Anxiety spiked again, but a shock of lightning stunned the Russian paladin in place with a temporary status effect before she could reach her. Ben jogged by as he kited the monster and waved at Tandy. He looked exhausted, but he was still alive, thank God. Dante approached the stunned paladin from behind and thrust his sword down into the soft, vulnerable curve between her neck and shoulder. Ruslana coughed up blood as she fell to her knees, hands twitching. Dante withdrew his sword. More blood poured out of the gash left behind. The leader of the Russians fell over, dead. "Oh my God, we did it," Tandy said breathlessly.
Help?
Ben called.
Shit!
Dante reaffirmed his grip on his sword and shield, and the three hurried to help Ben finish off the mini-boss. Tandy and Ben took turns kiting the oversized zombie, their respective attacks drawing its ire back and forth. Etta kept their HP topped off, and Dante remained poised to defend them at the slightest sign that the creature was closing in on either one. He took swipes at it when he could, but Tandy was glad to see he was careful not to provoke full aggro. Dante's combat relied on melee attacks just like the mini-bosses did. One big hit from that thing, and with all those buffs, there's no way he'd survive. Finally, in an explosion of fire and ash thanks to one last attack from Ben, the creature fell. Clouds of energy spun out of it and disappeared up into the ceiling. The corpse quickly rotted away to bare bone, then dust. They were silent. Not one of them even dropped to the floor to rest. If the others were feeling anything like Tandy, she was almost too exhausted to even bother with that much movement, not to mention overwhelmed. She didn't even notice how much XP they'd gained. The 3 dead bodies of the Russians littered the floor, along with spent arrows and debris. Eventually, Etta was the first to break their frozen silence. She insisted they park it on the floor and let her heal them one by one, starting with herself. "Gotta put your own oxygen mask on first," she said, and no one disagreed. Once they had spent enough time luxuriating in the wondrous sensations of healing magic, Etta urged them all to their feet. "I'd like to say we can take more of a break to mentally recuperate, but..."
Yeah, Dante said, no time.
Ben adjusted his robe, tugged the sleeves straight.
She's right.
Part of Tandy wanted to cry. She was so drained in spirit, but she plastered a smile onto her face. Just one more thing left to do. Etta led the way to the exit and opened the door. A long carpeted hallway stretched far ahead. Flanking the room were statues of the Death Knights they had encountered during their original attempt to storm the keep, depicting them as they had presumably looked in life, regal women in sturdy plate armor, swords held aloft. Odd that they were in a different room now. The cathedral ceiling glowed with an otherworldly green incandescence. They walked the length of it in contemplative silence. With every step, Tandy's heart banged a fierce tattoo in her chest at the possibility of those statues coming to life. She felt ready to black out by the time they passed the final set of statues, which remained mercifully inert. Perhaps they weren't as sensitive to sound when you aren't trying to bypass lower levels of the keep. Well, Edda stopped as they approached the final door. This is it. The Skull King is on the other side. Ready?
We have 1 health potion and 1 vitality potion left, Dante said.
That's gonna have to be enough. Tandy wiped her brow. Unless we find another magic button. They all paused, half anticipating just that. Nothing happened. Tandy laughed through the tension. Anyway, we've come this far and it's all been for this. She nervously cleared her throat. Let's do it.
Yeah, that's what I like to hear,
Dante shouted with a grin and grabbed Tandy in a side hug.
We're gonna own this dead guy.
Ben let out a long, slow breath.
Listen. Be ready for anything. This will be the most powerful enemy we've encountered by far.
The big bad.
Dante sucked his teeth.
We can be bigger and badder.
We're gonna have to be.
No one else spoke. Tandy adjusted her bow and quiver. She wanted to stay brave for the others, to not be a weak link. But she couldn't lie to herself. She was afraid. Suddenly she felt too small for her armor, for her weapon, for the room they stood in, for the world of Alterness. But she forced herself to be big enough to reach out and push open the heavy wooden door. Shadows fell in dark columns across the Skull King's throne room. Burgundy draperies cloaked the walls, giving the space a claustrophobic feel despite its massive size. At the far end, the king's enormous figure was rivaled only by Cerberus. He would have dwarfed even the Minotaurs. This was not the caricature of her ex she had originally designed. This monarch of bone and blood peered at something in his fleshless hand, examining it with eyeless sockets. Something that dangled from his raised fist. Something that delighted him enough to inspire a sinister chuckle. Slowly, Tandy's brain made sense of what she was seeing. It was a lone Korean player, uselessly trying to pry the king's thick fingers apart, feet kicking weakly underneath his mage robe. The Skull King flexed, cracking the player's bones. He dropped the limp body onto the floor, where it joined the destroyed corpses of the other 3 Koreans. He stepped forward, his massive form casting a long shadow, bodies crunching beneath his wide boot.
So,
his voice boomed through the very stone beneath their feet.
Who's next?
You're listening to Ctrl-Alt-Destroy, starring Summer Glau. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Realm. Listen away. Ctrl-Alt-Destroy is written by Andrea Phillips, Maurice Broaddus, Jacqueline Koyanagi, and E.C. Myers. Executive produced by Molly Barton and Julian Yap. Audio production, sound design, editing, and theme music by Amanda Rose Smith.